I'm proud of you, boys.
Who's ready to win? I'm so sorry, Mom.
Have you ever come out of a movie theater where you loved the film that you just saw so much that you wish you could relive it all over again just mere minutes after it just finished? I know I have. But it's not like I'm going to pay another $16 to just go back in the theater right then and there, nor do I have the patience to wait until the next $5 Tuesday just to go see it again. Instead, I'd usually just resort to listening to the soundtrack of the film that I just saw on the drive home just to get a little taste of the magic once more. To me, I've always believed that a film's musical score is just as vital to storytelling as script and dialogue. It shapes how we feel the story, whether it's a death scene or a moment of love and connection. The Long Walk movie is no different. The music in that film doesn't just underscore the action and drama, it breathes emotion into it. I had the amazing opportunity to interview Jeremiah Fraites, the composer for The Long Walk, also the co-founder of the two-time Grammy-nominated folk band, the Lumineers, and the songwriter for some of the Hunger Games movie, including the iconic Hanging Tree song that was sung by Jennifer Lawrence herself. Today's interview would not have been possible without the help of White Bear PR and the Lionsgate publicity team. I'd like to offer my sincerest gratitude for helping set up this interview and making this collaboration possible. I just got to say this right off the bat. I absolutely loved The Long Walk. So much so that I ended up seeing it 6 times in theaters and still intend to see it more.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So I want to start off by asking, because I find it pretty astounding that this is your first ever movie that you scored. Like, listening to the music, I would have thought that this was some, some composer that really has had a lot of experience. But I find it interesting, like, how did you start getting interested in composing for film when you've spent the last 2 decades really doing on-stage performing? Because I would imagine that on-stage performing is a far different medium than composing music for a movie.
It's a great question. I think that to the world, it was my first debut score. And I think to me, it felt like my 9th movie. And here's why. In the last 20 years, I've co-written all the Lumineers albums. So that's 5. And then I did 3 solo records. 2 were completely my own, piano, piano, and piano, piano 2. And then there was this other really beautiful instrumental album that was sort of like a remake of this guy named Taylor Dupre, an album called Northern. And so 5 band albums, 3 instrumental albums. I think by the time I got to my bona fide first debut, film score, I think they would say to us and say to me like, hey, your music really feels cinematic. Have you thought about scoring for movies? And I think I always want, I'm 39 now. I've always wanted to score for movies since I was probably 17. So it's been a long time coming, but really probably 5 to 7 years ago, I really was like, okay, now I want to score for movies. And it turns out it's not easy to get people to notice you to score. Even if you're in a band, I think that people in the film industry are sort of like, cool, you're in a band, but scoring is so different, to your point, to your question. And I think that, so Piano Piano 1, his first solo album that came out, I wrote and recorded it during the pandemic in Denver. My wife, Francesca, helped. She's been my score producer on these 2 films, The Long Walk and this Bruce Springsteen film called Deliver Me From Nowhere that hasn't come out yet, but is about to. We had this great idea of making the first Piano Piano, and we pressed a bunch of vinyls, and then we sent them to a bunch of directors and anybody we could get an email address or a mailing address to. And I think people were like, it's cool, let's see if we could connect the dots at some point, but never heard back from anybody in a substantial way. And then a few years later, I released Piano Piano 2, and we got a bunch of vinyls pressed. I signed a bunch and personalized them to a bunch of people in the industry, in the film industry. And it really took a fateful, breakfast or coffee with this one producer named Roy Lee. Roy Lee is one of the producers on The Long Walk. I was out in Los Angeles with the band. We were playing 2 shows at the Hollywood Bowl a handful of years ago. And I met with Roy the next morning following one of the shows. I was very tired and sort of half asleep. And we had this great 2.5 hour cappuccino where, at the end of the conversation, he said, I really love what you bring to the table musically. I really love your piano records. I love that they feel cinematic. I have this project. It's going to be with the studio Lionsgate, and it's a Stephen King adaptation, and it's a Francis Lawrence. He's going to be the director. And inside, I think I was like, oh yeah, of course I'm going to say yes to this. But I tried to play it cool and was like, yeah, we can, let me see the script. Let's talk about it. But I mean, I already knew I was going to say yes because the project was so interesting and tantalizing, with those, obviously Stephen King and Francis Lawrence. I just thought this is so interesting and fascinating to me. And for me as a composer, as a musician, a chance to show my versatility. I think that I kind of get a kick out of people probably thinking, wait, like a guy from the Lumineers did the Stephen King thing. How's that going to work? And I think when you see the film, you can see in some weird way the connective tissue between the music that I'm giving and writing, to the world, but then also this new sort of voice that I've given to cater and to, specifically compose for this film. And I think for me, what was so exciting about it, about The Long Walk specifically, was this sort of fateful call from director Francis Lawrence. He said, let's talk about the film. And this was before they started shooting. Francis said, not only do we want to service the horror thriller aspect of the Stephen King novel, but I really want to show sort of the beautiful camaraderie and relationship of the boys as they're walking. It's a short time, they're only going to be walking together within a few days, but there's a deep love and camaraderie and connectiveness that develops between these boys, specifically Ray Garrity and Peter McVries, played so beautifully by, Cooper Hoffman and David Johnson. So where a lot of time and energy I spent was trying to write cues and music that serviced these deep, profound relationships that developed between the boys, was like, how are we going to do that musically and instrumentally?
I'm really glad you brought up Francis because I know that this movie isn't the first one that you worked with him on. You worked with him on Hunger Games Catching Fire and Mockingjay Part 1. What was the conversation like between you and Francis when he wanted to bring you on for this movie? Because obviously it's different type of work than what you did for Hunger Games.
Yeah, I would say the nice thing about this movie was that it really felt like we were starting from ground zero. I didn't feel like artistically that there was any ties to anything in the past. And I really appreciated that. I know that he uses this amazing composer for all the Hunger Games movies. And I really appreciate from Francis that he really wanted just to see what I would bring to the table, what I was capable of as an artist to interpret, reading the novel and reading the script. And I feel like we really started from scratch, that this is going to be for this movie. This is going to be about servicing the horror and thriller aspects of Stephen King, but really trying to encapsulate these, these boys' relationships on this brutal highway stretch of road. I had tons of ideas. So I think for me as a musician, I'm really good at just like a sheer amount of output. So when we had the script, in this day and age, it was a PDF and it would say, page 115, page 37, whatever. So we would actually preface the song titles with P37, and then there was a corresponding PDF from us that would say where those were to go. And it was pretty hilarious. The film had already wrapped, everything had finished. And I had an in-person conversation with Mark Yoshikawa, the picture editor, where he said, it was so funny, Jeremiah, when you start sending me and Francis and the team all the tracks, we didn't know what the hell P37 meant or P115. He thought that was some weird musician code. And then he said at some point though, somebody realized, oh, maybe that's corresponding with the script, saying, okay, this cue, this specific idea goes in page 115 of the script, and we'll send that off. So the editing team realized, oh, maybe those are page numbers. I guess I took for granted that they were just going to understand that. And so then they realized, okay, if it says page 115, they would just grab the title that would say page, P115, McVrie's dad or whatever, or Ray's dad, whatever the titles were at the time. He said that he would drag and drop the stereo file in against the scene. And he said they were amazed about how they didn't really want to change all that much.
So obviously I want to talk a little bit about some of the individual tracks you made. And I think for myself and a lot of people that I talked with, the Olsen track when Hank gets his ticket and he gets killed off is, I think, easily a big emotional beat in the movie. But I will say that when I read the book and I read that death, I wasn't imagining kind of the score to sound very not just sad, but also in a weird way. I think it almost convey if it starts that trend of platonic love between the boys, because at that point, all the other boys that we see get killed in the movie are not part of the Four Musketeers crew, and Hank's death was really kind of the catalyst for that, at least in my opinion. So I'm curious about how you approach that track because it sounded both beautiful and horrifying at the same time, and it wasn't at all how I pictured how it would sound in my head when I was reading his death in the book.
I think that when scoring this movie, every death, there simply is not enough time or bandwidth to give special attention to every death. Obviously, the first death of the movie, Curly, is so shocking and brutal. When we read the book and the script, we knew that Curly was going to be a big death. And then I think that Olsen, I'm trying to remember, I think Olsen for me was maybe the next significant, important death because it was the first death of the Four Musketeers, and it just did really feel like a pivotal scene that the reality is really going to set in when we see Olsen, who's a lot of the movie's comic relief. He has such an innocence to him. He's chewing his gum. There's a party that I think some of the deaths, I think some people you're like, maybe they're not all going to die. Maybe they're going to Superman's going to fly in, or maybe the kids are going to run off with a gun and surprise one of the army guys, and it's going to turn into this like chase through the woods, and maybe seven of them are going to live. And sure enough, one by one, you really do see the harsh reality of this dystopian competition. So I think for me, Olsen, it really felt like an important death for all those reasons. And I was on a flight, and I had really tried to write stuff to capture what Olsen's death meant to me emotionally, what I thought it would do for the film. And believe it or not, it was this, I was on a flight thinking about the scene, and I had my iPad out, and I had drank way too much coffee. So I was just really like, I wished I was around an instrument, but I started to write this piece of music thinking about it. And it was this Olsen cue that came out of me on this iPad, just using my little fingers on this little like weird synth. I think I had sent it to Francis, not even saying specifically this is the Olsen scene, just like I think this feels germane and like the vibe of the film. I loved Olsen so much that I didn't want to tell Francis, hey, like listen to this, and kind of like somehow ironically not get the song. Like I didn't want him to say, check out this song specifically. And then he does in an unnatural way. And then he's sort of like, well, it's quite synthesizery. Let's not use that. So I sent him that with the batch of the other, I think we boiled it down to like 65 songs or something. And the first email I got back from Francis 24 hours later was, hey, Jeremiah, I listened to everything you sent me 2 times through. I'm going to listen a third time before we start shooting this movie in Canada. Here's like 5 or 6 songs I would really love for you to make longer and augment. And one of them was the Olsen cue. And I was like, yes, we're on the same page. This is totally. And then when we got, I forget if it's reel 5. I feel like it's reel 5. It's it's pretty deep into the movie when we see Olsen's death. That was the big task of really trying to. Me and my wife Francesca, we spent probably the most time on that cue because it's a very long cue. It's a very long, drawn out, really sad, gut wrenching death where they shoot him a few times in the stomach and they let it play out where they don't put him out of his misery, and the I did it all wrong, I did it wrong is really haunting. These sort of blood curdling screams from the actor who played Olsen. It's really like it's just, it's hard not to feel emotional just even talking about it. But we were working on that scene tirelessly. It felt like a day and a half just to get the 2 minutes right. And I remember once the Olsen cue really started to take shape, watching it, and we looked at each other, me and my wife, and we both had a lot of tears in our eyes, and we were like, okay, this is ready to send off to the team. And thankfully they loved it too. And it seems to become the almost like that scene from the movie, which I'm really proud of that scene. I think it was really something that it deserved to get that emotional. I think it could have been just as easily written a cue that could have just been scary or dissonant, to represent what you're seeing on screen. But I think we tried to elevate it the best we could, and Yeah.
I remember the first day I came out of seeing the movie though, because it wasn't on any streaming service, but I wanted to re-experience that track again. I just threw it on my phone and just threw it in a loop maybe 30 times over, just so I
Oh, wow. Awesome.
just to torture my. I don't know why I would torture myself that way, but it was. I mean, I really loved it.
No, that's good. It's good that music is meant to whether it's sappy or had, music and art are meant to do something to us. So if it's pushing one to listen to something over and over again, there's a reason for that. It's working somehow. It's great.
Yeah. I will say though that one thing that I'm curious about, and I've always wondered about this with any when composers compose music scores for a film, is how you all kind of choose not only to title your tracks, but also when a certain track would make a reprisal. So like I had noticed the most recent time when I watched it that the Olsen track was not just used for Hank himself, but even when Art was killed off. So I'm curious for you how, as a composer, how one you choose to title your tracks and when you choose to reprise a track in this scene or that scene.
So the titles of the tracks are typically, I mean, I guess you would say, for lack of a better description, somewhat limiting in terms of the title of the track because it needs to sort of explain the scene without having a spoiler. So I think for me, the track was always just referred to as Olsen's Death, but you're not going to put that on, Spotify or the streaming services as Olsen's Death. So basically, the rules were title the track as you deem fit, try to make it somehow connected to the scene without a spoiler. So a lot of the scenes have those characteristics. So Olsen, I felt like really appropriately, instead of being too verbose about like, Musketeer or again, you want to stay away from spoilers like Musketeer's death or Olsen's death. It just really felt fitting just to call it Olsen and to have that simplified nature. And then we hear the Olsen cue again for when Art Baker dies. And I really vied for and voted and tried to get that reprised because when we see Olsen's death happening on screen, we see Baker most noticeably shaken by that. Baker, breaks line and runs back to Olsen to try to save him and is clearly the most destroyed by that death. And then, of course, McVrees and Garrity take Baker, bring him back to his senses, and say, "Come on, he's gone. There's nothing you can do." But it kind of felt like if Olsen is the really, really big cue, we can't just copy and paste that for Baker. But I did want to have a sort of call and response, echo the Olsen death with the Baker death. So Baker is essentially the Olsen cue again, but just, edited in a different way, tweaked in a different way, reworked so that you kind of understood there was some connective tissue between those two. And we did that a couple times in the movie. I think there was there was this great dam montage where they see this beautiful dam and we hear that was, I think, the first cue I ever wrote for the film. I think I just called it the long walk or the long walk suite. And then we hear that cue again when the final two walkers, Ray and McVrees, are walking together. And it just sort of felt like what I love about the end of the movie, when we hear that reprisal of the dam cue again, all the way until the finale. I think what I tried to do in a very subtle way was from the time there's the two walkers until the end credits, almost fit in a lot of elements from all the previously heard cues without doing like literal copying and paste, but literally trying to, there's elements that I took from when Ray sees his mom for the last time when he's without his shoes, the dam montage when Stebbins and Barkovich are talking, their final moments on camera. I think that I tried to use all these little elements to really tie the room together so that as the audience in the theater was watching the film, whether you were aware of it or not, subconsciously the whole room was now being tied together for you musically, and that you could just subconsciously feel that the end was close and that you had just, sort of taken this journey, not only visually, but sort of sonically through my music that now here we are, it's all going to come together at the end. And yeah, I tried my best to do that.
There is one other track outside of just the scores that I definitely want to ask you about, which is when the boys sing "Oh My Darling Clementine," after they learned that Hank had a wife named Clementine. I'm curious because that's not an original song though. That's taking an existing song and then kind of putting your own twist on it. But I'm curious about because that's when I read the title of the track and listened to it, it's Oh My Darling Clementine, Mile 260. So I'm curious about how you took a song, because when I hear that song just in isolation, that sounds like a very gleeful song, but you've kind of
Sure.
juxtaposed it with your score that also um, adds a little bit of somberness to it. Even though if you watch the scene itself, it was like a moment of levity. So I'm curious about how you approach the scene like that when even the audience knows that at the end only one of them is going to come out alive.
So, at the risk of totally butchering this and getting this wrong, I don't want the Redditors to come after me, but I think this is all true. In the very beginning of the movie, when we first meet all the walkers and they're all sitting on the ground before the major arrives to number them, we see Hank Olson, I believe, eating a clementine. And I also believe that later we find out he was the only one with a wife whose name I think was also Clementine. So that song, I think, was a very subtle way to tie those elements together, but then also to really show that the walkers are now starting to lose their minds. They're exhausted, they're sleep deprived, they're probably starting to hallucinate. They're just completely delirious. And I think it's Collie Parker starts to sing that while kicking a can on that like dark highway road. There's a car on fire. I think it's just that song, the delirium of these young boys walking with the gleefulness of that tune. When I saw that, when that was sent to me, I had no say in that song. That was that the actors had sang on camera, and that was the audio. And it played so well. But I really thought, what if we take it up a notch? This gleeful song that everybody's heard, everybody knows the melody and words to. What if I threw something really dissonant and out of key underneath that? And I found this really interesting piano that I played these notes that had nothing to do with the key, just to sort of further elevate the delirium of that scene. And I thought it really worked well. I just loved that you didn't have to have these kids screaming or completely losing their minds to represent that delirium. And that's something that Francis Lawrence did so well, is just showed them singing this old folk song or whatever it is, a song that's been around forever. Oh my darling, Clementine. What a cool, subtle but very effective way to show the delirium and the mindset of these kids. And yeah,
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like I could go on and on all day talking, like going through every single track and how amazing I think it is. But I think at the end of the day, I think it's very I think it really says a lot when when you have a concept of a film like The Long Walk that is just very dark, depressing, and bleak just in concept, and then able to take that concept and turn it into, I think, a story about friendship, platonic love, and I think, as you said, the camaraderie though. So I think for people that still want to see the film, I know for myself, whenever I see a film and I absolutely love it and I can't re-experience it right away, I'll put on the soundtrack just to re-experience certain scenes. So, for people that watch this film or listen to your soundtrack, what do you hope that they will take away from the film or your score? And what do you hope that they will be able to learn?
I hope people are surprised when they see the movie. I think that seeing who wrote it, Stephen King, and people might say, "Oh, The Long Walk, what's that about?" And it's like, "Oh, in the book, 100 kids start walking, and the last one to keep walking wins, and the 90 other, they're all killed." It's a very bleak, obviously insanely brutal set of circumstances. What I hope people are is that they are surprised by, once they actually go see the film, that they are left with. I loved how Francis Lawrence, the director, was not gratuitous with the violence. I think he put the right amount of violence in it. I know that Stephen King wanted the movie to be rated R and not PG-13. So with that comes a certain amount of violence and a certain amount of cuss words. And I think that Francis really towed the line between servicing those specifications, but also really taking it and showing this beautiful camaraderie between these boys in the unlikeliest of places along this dark, desolate, cold road. And yeah, I hope people are really surprised by that. I really hope people find some beauty in that. A lot of what Ray and Peter, their relationship, just talking about when times are dark, try to find the light, try to be the light. That was something that I found really inspiring, that great sort of monologue scene where McVrees and Garrity are talking to each other about finding the light within each other. I hope that the young generation is able to do that within their own lives. And yeah, I don't know. I think that for me, I tried to show my versatility as a composer, and it was truly like the thrill of my career to be able to work with Francis Lawrence and just this young ensemble cast of really everybody, Cooper Hoffman, David Johnson, Charlie Plummer, across the board. Obviously Mark Hamill and Judy Greer, really one of the most like proud and exciting projects of my career.
Absolutely, and I think that's truly amazing. I mean, now just hearing you say that, I think what I might do after this, I'm just gonna call what all my guy friends and just tell them I love them because that was such
Love
a
it. Please
beautiful.
do. I might do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeremiah, thank you so much for your time today. This movie was absolutely outstanding. I don't think I could emphasize that enough, and I can't wait to see what you do in the future. And
Oh man, thank you.
congratulations on the long walk. Yeah, it's all about love at the end of the day, right? So
Yep. Thank you.
thanks so much, Jeremiah. Take care.
All right. Thank you.